In today's session, we will discuss about the contemporary approaches to psychology. The main objective is to understand the different type of approaches, namely cognitive, humanistic and existential approaches. First, let us identify what cognitive approach to psychology focuses on. The cognitive perspective focuses on how people think, understand and know about the world. The emphasis is on learning how people comprehend and represent the outside world within themselves and how our ways of thinking about the world influences our behavior. Many psychologists who follow the cognitive perspective compare human thinking to the workings of a computer, which takes in information, transforms, stores and retrieves it. In this view, thinking is information processing. The shift from traditional behaviorism more towards the study of how behaviorism influenced by mental processes is referred as the cognitive revolution, which is given by Miller in 2003. Although cognitive psychology began in the 1960s, earlier psychologists had also taken a cognitive orientation. Some of the important contributors to cognitive approach include the German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus, 1850 to 1909. He studied the ability of people to remember lists of words under different conditions, and the English psychologist Sir Frederick Bartlett, who studied the cognitive and social processes of remembering, created short stories that were in some ways logical but also contained some very unusual and unexpected events. The idea that our memory is influenced by what we already know was also a major idea behind the cognitive developmental stage model of Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. The developments in this field of linguistics, neuroscience and computer science in the 1950s contributed to the cognitive revolution. Computers provided psychologists a new model for understanding human mental processes such as thinking, memory and perception. These processes can be understood in terms of an information processing model. It is clearly evident that the cognitive perspective has influenced various areas of psychology, especially such as thinking, language, intelligence, personality and psychotherapy. Cognitive approach focuses on the important role of mental processes. It explains how people processes and remember information. They develop language, solve problems and think. It emphasizes the role of mediating processes in human behavior. The main assumption is that behavior can best be understood by looking at the processes which come in between environmental stimulus and the behavioral stimulus. In other words, it focuses on the process that helps people to know, understand and think about the world. This view also explains how information in the memory is processed at different stages and how our thinking about the world influences our behavior. Behavior can only be understood by studying mental processes, especially mediational processes that occur between stimulus and response. Psychologists should aim at preferring objective controlled scientific methods for investigating behavior. Information processing in humans is based on transforming information, storing information and retrieving this information from memory. It is like information processing in computers. The cognitive approach can be divided into three parts, namely human experimental psychology, computer analysis, information processing approach and cognitive neuroscience. Human experimental psychology further focuses on memory, attention, problem solving and language skills. These components help us understand the workings of a human brain. Computer analysis and information processing approach focuses on artificial intelligence and computer simulation. The cognitive neuroscience focuses on brain damage and various effects on cognition. This concludes the cognitive approach towards understanding psychology. The next approach that we will discuss in detail is the humanistic approach. The humanistic approach towards psychology emerged as a new school of thought in the 1950s. It was sometimes referred to as the third force in American psychology, as it was totally different from both psychoanalysis and behaviorism. Humanism is a perspective within psychology that assumes that people have a natural ability and capacity to take their decisions about their lives and to control their behavior. Humanistic psychologists claim that everyone has the capacity to develop to higher levels of maturity and realize his or her full potential if given the opportunity. The human being has free will to make decisions about his or her own life, rather than depending on societal standards. For example, if a person chooses to lead an average life, it cannot be considered as worse compared to a person who has higher aspirations. The basic assumptions of humanistic perspective are: 1. Human beings have free will. 2. Human beings are naturally good and capable of growth. Next, subjective and conscious experiences of the individual are important. Next, psychologists must prefer qualitative research in the form of open-ended questionnaires, unstructured interviews and observations. Two of the most well-known supporters of humanistic psychology are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who is best known for his theory of motivation. His theory emphasizes on psychological growth, and Abraham Maslow tried to understand the behavior in terms of the needs which motivate an individual. In this theory, Maslow proposed a hierarchy of needs of varying importance. It ranges from basic safety needs to the highest need in the form of self-actualization. The model is based on the principle that most of human behavior is goal-directed. At a very basic level, all our needs are related to survival instinct, that is, need for food, shelter, clothing, etc. Then comes the need for safety and security. Social needs such as family and other social support system follows next. Then finally, what Maslow and others describe as self-actualization needs are placed at the highest level. Self-actualization needs are about achieving full potential as a person and thus satisfying our self-esteem. Self-actualization is the complete realization of what one is capable of doing, involving maximum development of abilities and complete involvement in life. Hierarchy of needs as proposed by Abraham Maslow talks of physiological needs which include food, warmth and rest. On the next level, we have safety needs which talk about safety and security. Next comes belongingness and love needs. These talk about intimate relationships and friends. Next comes esteem needs. These talk about prestige and feeling of accomplishment. And on the last and final level, we have self-actualization, that is, achieving our full potential. Carl Rogers was also an American psychologist like Maslow who emphasized on the potential for good that exists within all people. Rogers was also influenced by his experiences with his psychotherapy clients. Rogers developed a model which focuses on the relationship between what we feel we are, the self, and what we feel we should be, the ideal self. When the two are experienced are being similar, the individual is congruent or fully functioning. In describing the potential of human development, he described the characteristics of a fully functioning individual, which include the values, which he felt that individuals were likely to hold. His idea has been very influential in counseling and therapy. His theory forms the basis of client-centered therapy. The client-centered therapy involves the client taking a lead role in the therapy session. According to Rogers, a therapist needs to display 3 features to maximize the effectiveness of this approach: unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy. Unconditional positive regard refers to the fact that therapist accepts their client for who they are, no matter what he or she might say. If the client is provided these factors of unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy, Roger believed that people were more than capable of dealing with and working through their own issues. Rogers also emphasized on the conscious experiences of his clients, which include each person's unique potential for psychological growth and self-direction. Rogers' determination, free will, and the importance of choice in human behavior are key factors for growth and development. Rogers highlighted that self-determination, free will, and the importance of choice in human behavior are the key factors for development and growth. Hierarchy of needs, as proposed by Abraham Maslow, talks of physiological needs, which include food, warmth, and rest. On the next level, we have safety needs, which talk about safety and security. Next comes belongingness and love needs. These talk about intimate relationships and friends. Next comes esteem needs. These talk about prestige and feeling of accomplishment. And on the last and final level, we have self-actualization, that is, achieving our full potential. Now, let's discuss about another contemporary approach called the existential approach. Existential approach to psychology emphasizes that subjective meaning of human experience, the uniqueness of the individual, and personal responsibility reflected in choice. This approach was pioneered by Swiss existential psychologist Ludwig Binswanger. Existential approach to psychology mainly focuses on how people understand the basic questions of human existence. Existentialism has its root in the 19th century writings of the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, starting with the basic realities of people's existence, or Dasein. Thus, existentialism is concerned with ontology, or the study of the nature of being. The existential approach considers human nature to be open-ended, flexible, and capable of enormous range of experience. According to this approach, a person in a constant process of becoming. In other words, I create myself as I exist. Being or becoming is a process in which people themselves are the source of change, and the struggle leads to realization of the full potential that is hidden in them. The word being is meant to emphasize that human existence is an activity more than a state or condition. Thus, being or becoming is not a static process and does not unfold automatically. Similarly, world is meant to convey a much richer and more meaningful ground for human life than would be conveyed by a more contextually free term, such as environment. The term being in the world is similar to identity or self. It is oriented towards meaning and growth, while it characterizes the type of being of all humans. It is also very unique of every person. According to existentialists, self-realization is possible only by focusing directly on our personal experiences and avoiding a logical analysis of one's life's situation. Existential approach to psychology has always criticized modern Western science for considering human beings as objects in their research pursuits. Existentialists advocate that scientists should emphasize on subjective experiences of individuals along with the objective notions of reality, and adapt their methods of study to meaningful human problems, and not tailor their problems to a restricted methodology borrowed from physics or physiology. Prominent personalities in the existential approach are Rollo May, Viktor Frankl and Erich Fromm. Rollo May, who has focused mainly on anxiety and loneliness, whereas Viktor Frankl has mainly focused on the meaning and suffering in life. Aspects of existential approaches are sometimes termed as phenomenological. This means that people's perceptions or subjective realities are considered to be valid data for investigation. Two people can perceive the same situation very differently. This difference, this phenomenological discrepancy, is often a focus of attention in existential approaches to personality. Existential psychology developed to understand how people cope with the realities of existence. This includes how individuals think about themselves, example, self-awareness, how they create a meaningful and satisfying life, and how they manage anxieties associated with inevitability of death. The basic assumptions of existential perspective or view are that all people have the capacity for self-awareness, preoccupation within fundamental questions about human existence. Free will is central concept in understanding human functioning and development. Each person has a unique identity that can only be known through relationships with others. People must continually recreate themselves because life's meaning constantly changes. Anxiety is a part of the human condition. Because the existential approach to human beings targets the underlying factors of perceived behavioral and mental health concerns, it may not directly address the primary issue a person in treatment is experiencing. Because of this, existential approach used for therapy, in spite of being quite adaptable, is often used along with other approaches to treatment. In this case study, we will discuss about Henry Gustav Molaison, known for years as HM in the literature to protect his privacy. He died in 2008 and developed a severe amnesia at the age of 27 after undergoing brain surgery as a form of treatment for the epilepsy he had suffered since childhood. He was subsequently the focus of study by over 100 psychologists and neuroscientists, and he has been mentioned in over 12,000 journal articles. Molaison's surgery involved the removal of large parts of the hippocampus on both sides of his brain, and the result was that he was almost entirely unable to store any new information in long-term memory. There were some exceptions. For example, after 1963, he was aware that a US president had been assassinated in Dallas. The extremity of Molaison's deficits was a surprise to experts of the day, because many of them believed that the memory was distributed throughout the cerebral cortex. Today, Molaison's legacy lives on. His brain was carefully sliced and preserved and turned into a 3D digital atlas, and his life story is reportedly due to be turned into a feature film based on the book researcher Suzanne Corkin, who wrote about him. Permanent present tense, the man with no memory and what he taught the world. The summary of the lesson. The cognitive perspective focuses on how people think, understand and know about the world. The emphasis is on learning how people comprehend and represent the outside world within themselves, and how our ways of thinking about the world influence our behavior. Many psychologists who adhere to the cognitive perspective compare human thinking to the workings of a computer, which takes in information and transfers and stores and retrieves it. In their view, thinking is information processing. Psychologists who rely on the cognitive perspective ask questions ranging from how people make decisions to whether a person can watch television and study at the same time. The common elements that link cognitive approaches are an emphasis on how people understand and think about the world, and an interest in describing the patterns and irregularities in the operation of our minds. The humanistic approach was introduced in the 1940s in the United States. Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers were the major proponents of the humanistic approach. The humanistic approach focuses on the importance of the client's subjective experiences, as well as a concern for positive growth rather than pathology. The major themes of humanistic psychotherapy are genuineness, empathy, and unconditional positive regard. The major themes of existential therapy are the client's responsibility and freedom. According to this approach, clients have the capacity for self-awareness and choice. The humanistic perspective views human nature as basically good, with the potential to maintain healthy, meaningful relationships and to make choices that are in the best interest of oneself and others. The humanistic therapist accompanies or guides clients to free themselves from assumptions and positions that might be blocking them from living fuller lives. The psychologist encourages and highlights growth and self-actualization, while maintains that clients have an innate capacity for responsible self-direction. The existentialist approach is more interested in guiding or accompanying clients to find philosophical meaning while they face anxiety. This is done by exploring the importance of choosing to think and act authentically and responsibly. According to existential psychology, the fundamental problems clients face is rooted in anxiety over isolation, loneliness, despair, and eventually death. The existential psychologist assumes that the client's problems are due to not being able to use their judgment or make choices enough or well enough in order to create meaning in their lives. When outside influences may play a role in their client's limited ability to carry out choices, the existential psychologist and the clients will confront these influences in order to move forward.